Hi, this week on LokadTV we have a truly intercontinental edition as we welcome Sarah Barnes-Humphrey live from Toronto. Sarah is the presenter of the podcast Let's Talk About Supply Chain and has also been named as one of Canada's most influential women in supply chains. Today we're going to get her views on the role of the media and understand how in an industry that lacks a lot of glamour at times, the industry can collaborate together. So Sarah, thanks very much for joining us today.
Hi guys. You could just... I'm so happy to be here.
Cool. Perhaps you could just start by just telling us a little bit more about your background and also how you kind of got into the world of supply chains.
Sure. Well, supply chain's kind of in my blood. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and my dad, ever since I could remember, they were talking about logistics and supply chain at the kitchen table. Because my dad ended up owning a freight forwarding company just outside of Toronto, and so I grew up with it. I've been in logistics and supply chain for over 20 years. I worked while I did all of my designations and my schooling. So I got hands-on experience as well as, getting the designations, the Certified International Trade Professional designation that I did. I've got a few more. I've got CSCMP and a few more that I've done over the years. But I got to be able to do operations. I did sales. I did marketing while I was there. And it's a funny story of how I got into podcasting because I was director of sales and marketing. And I decided that I did not like what was out there for supply chain on the marketing side. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts and I thought, hey, why not? Let's start a podcast. And I walked over to my customs division and said to one of the guys in that division, I said, do you want to be my co-host? And he said, yes. And so my team and I sat down and we originally called it Two Babes Talk Supply Chain. And that was really just to get some attention and, just change things a little bit on the marketing side and supply chain. And then, unfortunately, we closed the doors in November 2017, and I walked away and decided I wanted to do the podcast full time. And I started a Woman in Supply Chain series. And that was January 2018, but they didn't really resonate with the name, and I no longer had my co-host. So I rebranded everything to Let's Talk Supply Chain within a week, and I don't suggest that on anybody because it was the most stressful week of my life, I think. But everything's grown since then, and it's been great. I'm building a technology platform in supply chain. I'm building the Let's Talk Supply Chain brand, video series, YouTube channels, blog series. So I'm staying busy.
Okay, great. I think Johannes, he's got a daughter at home and he'd probably sympathise with talking about supply chain around the dinner table. But you've also started working on a thing called the Trade Squad. Perhaps you could just sort of tell us a little bit more about that as well.
Well, so back in January, for some reason, I decided that I wanted to go into blog series, and I also wanted to go onto YouTube. And my husband and I, we were just talking about it. And actually, no, you know how it started? So my girlfriend ended up emceeing a conference that I also was moderating a panel at. And she tweeted and tagged me in it and hashtag Trade Bestie. So she called me her trade bestie. And then we had some other women from the industry weigh in, and somebody else said we should start a trade squad. So then I was like, that is a great idea for a YouTube show. And my husband and I started talking about it, and I was like, what if we made it the View Meets Sports Center for supply chain on YouTube? And that's just sort of how we got started. And Episode 2 is coming out on June 21st. So really excited about that. I've got a really great video production team. And that's just sort of how it got started.
Okay, great. And today we're going to be talking with Johannes a little bit about the topic of sort of modern media in the world of supply chains. I think, as you mentioned, with the kind of idea of two babes, it's an industry that it very much lacks a bit of glamour, could do with a little bit more of glamour in it. What's your kind of take on these things, Johannes?
Clearly on the women's supply chain, there is a dire need that we can agree. I think I stopped counted meetings with over 20 people with 0 women. It's a bit a shame, but that's still, you feel like, that feels very 20th century. But anyway, it's the way it is, and I'm very glad that we are taking step. Lokad has we are about 40% women as employees in company, which is, for a tech company, it's tough. It's very tough to maintain and not having a ratios that drop to 5% like everybody else. But anyway, in terms of media, yes, the key challenge that I see in supply chain is that I would say the independent press, from my perspective, the professional press of old has kind of disappeared. I mean, the revenue have dwindled. And as a result, you still have bits of professional press, but it's literally an endless stream of advertisement. You know, it goes from one article written to sponsor one company to another article that is sponsoring another company. And so you have professional news, which are 50 pages worth of advertising. I mean, it's not that bad. It's good to know who has a budget to advertise stuff. But when you want to have, I would say, more insightful information, it's kind of lacking. And my experience was that we have seen with the press, the professional press, kind of this independent press disappear. I'm old enough to have, in my early days, to have been able to read this kind of press, you know, in the 90s, and it's basically no more. And yet, especially in areas like supply chain that have been a bit lagging behind, I would say, in terms of new online practices, we have not yet seen emerge a vibrant, I would say, online communities where people are trying to discuss a bit more in depth and also a bit more transparently what they think about, I don't know, various vendors, various approaches, various etc. I would say removing the advertising part and trying to challenge a bit more in depth the elements being discussed.
Okay, and the other thing we've kind of noticed in the industry is it's an industry that's got so many buzzwords, to the extent that Sarah had to create her own supply chain data dictionary just to kind of keep up with all of these buzzwords. Do you think there's too many kind of buzzwords in the industry, Sarah?
Yeah, we could probably simplify things a little bit. I think buzzwords is one thing. I think acronyms are a completely other. I think, you know, supply chain is just flooded with it. And when you're just coming into the industry and we want to encourage the next generation of supply chain professionals, it's a little overwhelming to, you know, have a conversation with somebody and have them throw out all these acronyms. And that is one of the reasons why I put together that dictionary, because, you know, you just want to be able to easily navigate supply chain. But I think it's also a mindset shift, that we have to really focus on the language that we're using when we're talking to other people in supply chain and make sure that we're simplifying it and not going back to the traditional way of all acronyms.
You mean that I should stop asking myself whether my WMS is compatible with my VMI practice and whether we are going to be s&op compliant? I can't believe it. I mean, we need those acronyms. We need them.
Maybe
so how can we go towards something that's...
Maybe we axe out the old ones.
So how can we go towards something with a bit more substance then, Johannes? What do you think is kind of the key driver behind that?
I mean, one thing that I see, I mean, for me, because I've been following, you know, very different communities. One is, I would say, software, especially open source software, and supply chain for over a decade. And what I believe open source software is like decades ahead in terms of I would say, way of communicating online, of transparency in many angles. I mean, the web, as we know it, actually emerged from this subculture of I would say, hackers putting some code online, and the very web actually was invented in this sort of community. But what is interesting, I see that, for example, failures get in software communities intensely discussed, and also the drawbacks. Whenever there is somebody who is pushing for something, you will have a lot of discussion on all the negative aspect with this something. And it's interesting because you see, whenever you're considering a solution, it always an angle, it always comes with a negative side, which is all the things that you're excluding, all the things that you cannot do by design, etc. But it's good. I mean, you're making, you know, a design decision in your process or whatever, and you exclude plenty of things. And in supply chain, it's still very rare to even have people who are actually discussing failures, problems, and not, you know, the fake problem description where everything is going well at the end. Like the real problem, the real nasty problem where we did that, it did fail badly, and then it kept failing, and then ultimately we terminated the whole thing because it would never stop failing. There's this sort of relatively harsh discussion, maybe negatives.
And you mentioned a really interesting word there, is the word fake. I mean, there's so much kind of fake news around at the minute. I mean, Sarah, how can we kind of sift between what is good information, what is the bad information? How can we know what is good and bad when there's so much free information out there right now?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. I was doing a mentorship session a little while ago, and she was saying to me, she's like, I don't really know where to go. It's so overwhelming because there's so much information out there. And, I don't know what the answer is really. But you need to go out there and find the influencers, the people that have the knowledge, that are talking about the different topics that you want to learn about. I think that's one thing about being overwhelmed with all of the information, is maybe to go back and figure out what you want to learn about first, and then go and check out the trusted sources. You know, the people that have got the comments, maybe the shares, the likes, obviously positive comments. If there's negative comments, that might not be a very good article. So I think it kind of comes from you and really drilling down what you want to learn about first, and then taking it from there.
And how do you see kind of us finding these influences? You mentioned there's a lot of other domains where there's many more sort of influences, like the software industry. Do you see these sort of coming through in the supply chain world?
Yes, gradually. And I completely agree with the key for influencers, but not necessarily for knowledge, just for integrity. You see, because the things that I saw is that if I look at this professional press of old, one of the reasons why I believe they had more integrity is just because they had a business model where their clients were companies consuming the journal. So they were the money was coming from people buying the journal, not people advertising in the journals. The advertisement was an add-on. It was a nice, hefty add-on, but it was an add-on. The subscription was driving the sales. So and this press is gone, for plenty of reasons, mostly the internet, but basically it's gone, it's not coming back. But what I see is it has one cardinal value, it is integrity, I believe. And the interesting thing is, I believe, with people like Sarah, is that when you go for a YouTube channel, you put your name, on the table. So if you start, just spilling whatever, fake news of the day, or just, not doing this proper investigation work of, I would say, having this healthy skepticism about what is presented and whatnot. Let's, for example, get overly enthusiastic about blockchain, for example, whatever. I mean, in the end, it's your own reputation that damage. So where I see, a resurgence of that is that people like you, Sarah, who are actually taking upon themselves of maybe not carrying the entire knowledge of this industry, because I don't think it's so diverse that anybody can carry, one person can carry that on their shoulder, but being like a spotlight as far integrity is concerned, and so being a bit a beacon to shed light on stuff that deserve attention. And I see that as something that is gradually emerging. I mean, it's and I believe what you've just started with your podcast is actually quite cool.
Oh, well, thank you. Can I jump in there just for 1 second? Because I think it's also neat to allow other supply chain professionals that don't really realize that there's this type of opportunity in the industry. There really hasn't been this type of opportunity in the industry before. And that's one of the things, that's my big vision for Let's Talk Supply Chain, is to get supply chain professionals really that want to be involved on the media side, and bring them onto the media side and say, hey, there's opportunity over here. You want to be on a video? You want to interview somebody? Let's do it. You want to be a part of a podcast? Let me help you. And I think that that's going to be a really big component as well. And they're going to put their names on it, and they're going to help grow this industry as well.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about kind of the structure of the industry at present. I mean, what have you observed in kind of the way that knowledge is currently kind of passed around at the minute?
Well, I think that there's been a really big growth on thought leadership, as far as people really taking it upon themselves and putting their thoughts out there, right? When I was working maybe with the older generation, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to put a spotlight on themselves because they felt really weird about, promoting themselves and their thoughts and what they knew. And I see that changing, right? I see that people are really realizing that their thoughts matter, that their opinions matter, and that collaboration is going to be the key, right? Engaging with other people's posts, commenting on other people's posts. And so we're really starting to create that community, whereas before it was very siloed, very traditional. Nobody really did any of that. So that is really exciting to see. What about you guys? Are you guys,
Well, I mean, Johannes, he's been kind of in the industry now for just over a decade. We won't talk too much about his age, but what have you seen change over the last decade or so?
I mean, yes, clearly. I mean, the thing is that I've seen is first, I would say with a series of wave of technologies. I mean, some of them related to the sort of things that Lokad does with advanced optimization, but some that are not exactly related, just RFIDs or other things that supplement, I would say smart supply chains in general. What I see is that a shift from the need to have literally tons of people with, I would say, some level of education, but not necessarily that much, to a need to, which was already present, but that intensified, which has to have a lot of very smart, very capable people. I mean, a lot more in quantity. And suddenly, supply chains, which was mostly a game of numbers, you needed a lot of people for pretty much everything, becomes also a game of having, I would say, quality people. People with better education, people who can really think, modelize, analyze, and whatnot. I mean, things that have been around for a long time in other industries, such as finance, for example. And suddenly, what I see in this decade is that as soon as you want to attract, bright people, you need to make yourself attractive and visible. And suddenly that takes effort. There is one very good reason why, for example, in the software industries, people have been, super early adopters at pushing blogs, pushing, every single CTO was writing, pretty much as much for their own teams and writing for the external world, because they were so struggling with hiring, actually. So you see, I see that as a way for many companies first to just attract enough attention so that they can hire the right people. For example, in supply chain, the Zalando blog is been doing probably an excellent job. So Zalando is a very large fast fashion e-commerce company based in Berlin. And they have been for a couple of years super open. I believe that it was primarily driven by just their hiring needs. But also I think your point is very correct. It's by having a discussion in the open, collaboration, you can actually polish and refine your own ideas about what you're pushing. So it's very interesting, because when you start having this one-sided dialogue of just pushing stuff out there, once in a while you get some feedback, and that's really nuggets. That's very interesting, and you can learn a lot of things.
I think that you made a very good point about taking a look at different industries. And so I go back to even conferences in supply chain, right? Now we're starting to look at maybe the tech industry and how they're doing conferences, and they're bringing Gary V, or they're making it a lot more fun, a lot more collaborative environment. And I think you're right. I think we have to look at other industries and how they're engaging the next generation and how they're building communities as well, for us to really be able to hone, put together our communities and drive change forward.
Okay, and we sort of spoke a bit about this kind of evolution and driving that change forward. Can you see any sort of challenges being introduced because of that? I mean, what challenges can you see from a media perspective for, say, the next 10 years?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we're facing a lot of challenges as supply chain as a whole, because there's still a really big mindset shift, I believe, from the traditional into the innovative. I'm still coming up against it for the most part. And so I think the first challenge we need to get over is, changing that mindset, being a little bit more open, be open to collaboration. Collaboration is a big word for me. I love that word. Winning together is something that I talk about all the time. But I think it's going to take us a little while to get into that collaborative spirit in supply chain. As far as media, I think we're evolving pretty well. I think there's a lot of people that are coming out and doing really great things like what you're doing over at Lokad. There's lots of different innovators, Supply Chain Now Radio. Freight Waves is doing a really good job. They just hired an actual an anchor from the news side of things and brought them into supply chain, right? So again, we're looking at different industries. How can we move things forward? How can we shake things up? But it's a really big topic. And like you said, not everybody is going to know everything about supply chain or really even going to be able to cover the entire topic, really. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. I also really hope that we can engage a lot more supply chain professionals and bring them into the media side to make things interesting and, keep churning out really great content so that we can all move forward and work together.
Yeah, and you mentioned a key sort of thing there was shake things up. I think that was one of the ideas behind LokadTV when it kind of started, is we wanted to challenge the way the industry was kind of doing things. I mean, what are your hopes for LokadTV kind of in the future, Janice?
I mean, yes, my mother's hope is first to help Lokad to just attract the right amount of talent. When I was telling you about the hiring side, I mean, Lokad is a relatively fast-growing company. I mean, we didn't raise $500 million like some Californian startups, but we are still growing fast. Not that fast, but fast. We are mostly bootstrapped, but still, that means that we need to hire a lot of people. And indeed, we want to attract bright young people who don't necessarily know what VMI, WMS, and s&op means, so it cannot be really the entry point into what we're doing. And then, indeed, for me, there is also so many things that have been, I would say, for example, one of the things that I want to convey is maybe to break a bit this culture of software monolith. I mean, it's something that has been plaguing the supply chain for decades. It's like the idea of having this one system to rule them all, like the Lord of the Rings, and in the darkness to bind them with this one thing. And it's very funny because I'm still facing, I mean, probably once a week, a company that tells them we want to have the one system with a big O. That will do everything, and I'm thinking, how can you open yourself to any innovation if you do that? If you decide that you have this one monolith, then by definition, you have no experimentation possible, no leeway for any of your employee to try and maybe fail at anything. But if they can't even try, there is not even a single chance that they will succeed at anything. So it's. So that's I would say some insight, and then also I think the whole thing it's kind of fun.
Oh, that you bring up a good point, because I think the industry needs a little bit more fun content. Somebody said to me the other day that I bring some fun content, but we still need serious, and I was like, well, I think we need a little bit more fun.
Yes, exactly.
So if we start sort of kind of concluding today and sort of bringing things together, I mean, what are your kind of your big hopes for the future? And we sort of mentioned this is an industry that might need a little bit more fun. Can you see that evolving over the next few years, and how do you see that happening?
Absolutely. So again, my big vision for Let's Talk Supply Chain is to be able to give opportunities to other supply chain professionals to come into the media side, to bring their innovation, their creativity, have a little bit more fun. Bring some sexiness to the industry, right? Because I've actually heard that word and supply chain in the same sentence so many times in the last couple of months. It's mind blowing. And for them to bring some more fun, right? Some more creativity. We can't grow unless we're open-minded and we're listening to each other and working together and bringing our ideas together. So that's my big vision for Let's Talk. I also have my online platform that I'm working on called Ships. And I think that is going to streamline. That's going to bring, a lot of creativity and innovation on the logistics side, but also put together an ecosystem. And like you said, with the big monolith, it's not about being a monolith, really. It's about having, those open APIs so that you can integrate into your system, not having one system to do everything.
But you don't need integration. You have one system, and it does everything. So stop those API. You don't need them.
Well, yeah. How are you going to be open-minded and open to integration and APIs if you have that one system? So I completely agree with you. That's what I was saying.
Yes. Don't worry. I was kidding. But it's and again, it's very funny because when you look at I would say the market landscape from the vendor perspective, I'm talking about software vendors. I mean, we still have in supply chain half a dozen vendors that are super giant. They are the Oracle, the GDA, the IBM of this world, and they are. I'm not saying that they are not doing good work. I'm just saying that if you just have those super giants, it does not yield as much, I would say, innovation as you can observe in other areas, such as, for example, social networks, or where you have a vibrant ecosystem of wannabe giants. They are not just giant yet, but they are growing and healthy, and they challenge the status quo quite a lot, so that the giant of today cannot just rest on their laurels and be done with it.
Okay, and we'll sort of leave the final word to you then, Johannes. Can there ever be sort of fun and sexiness as we have in some of the other nice sort of tech industries?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you could see the incredible, passionate discussion that people have about the Linux kernel, and programming is not all fun, but programming a kernel of an operating system is like very, I would say, very much into the dark art as much computer science goes. And yet you have people that are really passionate about that and that make, I would say, fun, enjoyable content in that. Sexy, I'm not too sure. Unfortunately, when we go to software communities, they tend to have lots of people with big birds. So I'm not exactly sure that it would qualify as sexy, but at least it's entertaining, I would say.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up there. But Sarah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate being on the show, and good luck with all that you're doing.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, that's everything for this week of LokadTV. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.